I think that any horizontal escalation, meaning by horizontal escalation, uh, expanding the geographical scope of military activities is possible if they decide that NATO is crossing certain red lines and is getting involved in this conflict directly. Then I think all the bets are off table, and the Russian leadership might consider various ways of escalation. Unfortunately, I wouldn't rule out even tactical nuclear missiles use.
Andrey Kortunov is Director General of the Russian International Affairs Council and a former advisor to the Kremlin. And we can talk to him now. Good morning to you, Andrey.
Good morning.
Good to have you with us. We've had a lot of speculation about what President Putin will announce tomorrow. What are you expecting?
Well, I don't know what exactly he can announce. There were rumors that he might go for mobilization, at least partial and even general mobilization. These rumors have been denounced in the Kremlin. He might opt for some kind of negotiations with the Ukrainian side, although it was also stated in the Kremlin that this date should not be linked to any particular decisions regarding the military operation. So we don't know. I think that there are lots of attention because definitely many in Russia would like this whole thing to end as fast as possible. But we don't know whether Putin will say anything significant that would change the course of the battle on the ground.
You say many in Russia hope they want this whole thing to end, as I'm sure many do listening around the world. But is there any concerted opposition to this military campaign? Clearly, it's very difficult, isn't it, given the repression of any dissenting voices?
It's hard to tell because many of active leaders of the political opposition have left the country. And it's very difficult to remain an active politician being abroad. Also, some of the liberal media that used to be strongholds of dissenting voices are now closed down. And of course, we have quite restrictive legislation on public gatherings, rallies, and demonstrations. So if you follow the opinion polls, you will get the impression that the support for Mr. Putin is growing, and there is a rally around the flag phenomenon in Russia. But we don't know how deep this support is, and we don't know how sustainable this support is if the military activities continue.
As you say, any dissent is brutally suppressed. Opposition leaders have been rounded up, arrested, put in prison. The media is very tightly controlled. But do you think this sense of the deaths piling up? We're hearing that around 15,000 Russian soldiers may have died in the war. And indeed, the economic pain, which is being exacerbated by Western sanctions. Do you think all of that is beginning to turn the Russian people against what is happening?
It's hard to tell because, of course, the public space is controlled by state. And the Russian state presents this conflict not as a conflict between Russia and Ukraine, but rather as a conflict between Russia and the collective West. So there are direct links to the Second World War. That the West supports the so-called neo-Nazism in Ukraine, and the West is committed to destroying Russia. And of course, they feature all the manifestations of Russophobia in the West, arguing that it's not about Putin, it's not about the Russian leadership, it's not about a specific operation in Ukraine. It is because they hate Russia, they want to destroy Russia, they want to cut Russia into pieces, and we're pushed into the corner. So that's the logic which is used.
But a lot of Russians are able to get round these tight restrictions and find out what's really going on, aren't they? A lot of them are aware. They're finding ways on the internet to find out what is really happening. They are aware of the bloodshed that is being inflicted by Russian troops on Ukraine, a country with which Russia for many years has had very close and amicable ties?
Well, I think that many in this country are confused and they don't know what to believe. Indeed, there is a picture presented by independent media and by foreign media, but at the same time, there is a picture which is transmitted by the Russian official media. And especially if you live in a small town or in rural areas, you usually rely on TV more than you rely on internet. So we cannot and should not underestimate the power of the state propaganda.
Despite all the setbacks which the Russian forces have suffered, I mean, they have failed to gain much territory even along the east of the country. They had to pull back from their efforts to launch an assault on Kyiv. They are still battling to seize what is left of Mariupol. Do you think that President Putin will tomorrow try to point this as a success, or do you think he will admit that he's got to launch an all-out war instead of this euphemism of a special operation, which is the phrase that he's been using? Do you think that he will frame this as an all-out war and call up more conscripts and throw more military might at it?
I don't think so. I think that he will declare success stories. Indeed, Russia is advancing in Donbass, maybe slower than it was anticipated, but definitely Russians are moving ahead.
He doesn't really have many success stories, though, does he?
Well, that depends on how you look at the situation. The offensive is slow, a couple of miles a day, but definitely Russian army is advancing. It controls the Kherson region. It controls the shore of the Azov Sea. So if you want to make a case for success, you can definitely do that. And I think that Putin would stick to this view that we should liberate the territory of Donbass to make sure that people there are safe. And that is, at least as I can see it from here, this is the minimum that would constitute the case for victory.
If he does try and claim tomorrow that there are successes in this, I mean, people around the world will simply not believe that, will they? I know you're saying that he has taken some territory along eastern Ukraine, but that is a very small amount of progress, given the amount of time, the amount of military hardware, and the amount of troops who've been killed since this invasion began.
Well, I think that one of the problems here is that the Russian leadership cannot afford a defeat without creating serious political challenges and risks back at home. So there should be something there that they can present as victory. And I think that this is something they will stick to, even if additional escalation is needed. Russia cannot lose this war like Ukraine or the West cannot lose this war.
You talked about even if additional escalation is needed. Do you think that President Putin could carry out that threat for some form of nuclear strike? Or when you talk about escalation, are you talking about strikes on other countries to try and draw in NATO?
I think that any horizontal escalation, meaning by horizontal escalation, expanding the geographical scope of military activities is possible if they decide that NATO is crossing certain red lines and is getting involved in this conflict directly. Then I think all the bets are off table, and the Russian leadership might consider various ways of escalation. Unfortunately, I wouldn't rule out even tactical nuclear missiles use. It's not very likely. I think the chances are low. I think the West is cautious not to cross the red lines. But definitely, we don't know what will constitute the red line crossing for the strategists in the Kremlin.
But what you're suggesting is that President Putin could carry out some sort of strike on a NATO country in order to draw NATO directly into this conflict.
I would say they would present it the other way around. If NATO gets involved directly, if there are NATO military going into Ukraine, or if there are any other ways in which NATO can get involved in this conflict in a direct way, then NATO becomes a party to the conflict, and then any actions against a party in the conflict can be justified.
Let me just ask you one final point. We know that President Putin is very well protected, that he even meets world leaders at the opposite end of a huge desk, that he has his personal taster and so on. But do you think that there is a chance that some in his inner circle could turn against President Putin, could try to remove him from power if they feel that this war is frankly proving to be a disaster for Russia?
Well, we can never judge about the probability of such cases. Of course, the inner circle of Mr. Putin stays loyal to the president. And I think that all these people depend on the president. I don't really expect a lot of dissent in this particular group. But I also believe that some sections of the Russian political establishment, especially people dealing with the economic management of the country, might have rising concerns about where this whole thing goes. So they might have some reservations about the current developments. That's clear.
Andrey Kortunov, former advisor to the Kremlin, now Director General of the Russian International Affairs Council. Good to speak to you. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye.